Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Tonight I invite you into one of the most haunting tales of ancient Greece. This is not merely a story, but a myth, an echo from Thebes, carried across centuries, where prophecy and fate intertwine in ways no mortal could escape. So Oedipus, son of King Laos and Queen Jocasta, stands at the heart of this ancient tragedy. His life unfolds under the shadow of a prophecy, teaching us that destiny often finds its path no matter how hard we try to run from it. In Greek mythology, he is remembered as the child of Thebes, whose choices fulfilled the words of the oracle. In literature, he lives on through Sophocles, the great tragedian, in works such as Oedipus Rex, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone. So when we speak of Oedipus, we do not speak of a simple tale. We speak of myth and tragedy intertwined, a timeless reflection on fate, knowledge, and the limits of human will. Disclaimer: the visuals in this video were created using artificial intelligence. There are no explicit or disturbing scenes. However, some dramatic imagery has been designed to capture the spirit of the myth. If you are sensitive to such visuals, please consider this before watching. If you wish to continue these journeys with me, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share in the comments which legend you'd like me to bring to life next. Together, we will wander through the myths, the tragedies, and the epics of the ancient world. Now, take another deep breath, relax, and let the tale unfold. Wishing you peace, rest, and the comfort of story. The tragic journey of Oedipus begins now. Listen and heed. I am taking you now to a land where time retreats, where even stones keep their memory, and lost tongues are whispered. Walk beside me on this journey, for our steps will carry us to the birth of ancient Thebes, to the very beginning of the age-old legends that wrote the fate of a city, to the first spark of existence, to the moment when the veil of time is lifted. Thebes did not come into being as an ordinary city. It was founded by a god's decree and a hero's resolve. A victory wrested from the land itself. The one who breathed its first breath was a prince from distant lands, washed in the salt of the seas, Cadmus. He grew up on the magnificent coasts of Phoenicia, in palaces shaded by cedar trees and steeped in the scent of spices. But fate tore him from his homeland. When his sister Europa was abducted by Zeus, the mightiest of the gods, Cadmus's family gave him a single command: do not return until you have found Europa. Thus, Cadmus's journey began with a vow of quest. He set out as a prince in search of his sister, unaware that where he arrived, he would create a city and a people, laying the foundations of a civilization no one could have foreseen. Legend has it that his path led him to Delphi, the sacred temple of Apollo. Amid the temple's steep cliffs and mysterious atmosphere, the oracle of Apollo spoke to him, her voice coming from the depths of the caves. You will not find the sister you seek, Cadmus, but fate will offer you a far greater gift. Where you go, you shall found a city on the vast lands of Boeotia. Follow the cow before you, the sacred animal with white spots. Where it rests, yielding to a pause, you shall lay the unshakable foundations of your city. Cadmus listened to this riddle-like counsel. After a long journey, he found himself in the fertile green plains of Boeotia. The white-spotted cow walking ahead with heavy steps finally lay down, not from exhaustion, but by divine sign, under a grove of oak trees to rest. Cadmus drove his sword into the ground and declared, "This shall be the place. Here is where the gods say to stop." Thus, the first seed of Thebes was sown. The sacred land bowed to the weary but determined will of a Phoenician prince. But the spirit of the land would not surrender easily. There, at a spring dedicated to Ares, guarding the source of life-giving water, lurked a fearsome dragon, its scales shining like armor. When Cadmus and his few remaining men went to fetch water, the beast attacked them with massive claws and fire-breathing fury. Cadmus lost brave warriors, yet he did not falter. He took up his sword and, in the name of the gods, faced the dragon. After a long and bloody struggle, Cadmus brought the dragon down. This victory was not merely the defeat of a monster, but the beginning of a new lineage. For the wise goddess Athena appeared through the smoke of the triumph and gave Cadmus counsel, her voice like the wind. "Take the teeth of this monster and plant them like seeds in the earth." Cadmus planted the dragon's sharp teeth into the soil one by one, as if they were precious jewels. Before long, an incredible thing happened. From the earth sown with dragon's teeth sprang not crops, but warriors clad in armor, helmets gleaming in the sun. They were the spar toy, the sown men. They attacked one another, and after a bloody civil war, only 5 remained standing. These 5 warriors became the first noble families of Thebes, the source of the city's noble blood. Cadmus laid the first stones of the city with these men, sprung from the heart of the land. The rising walls were called Cadmia in his honor and for his courage. Over time, Cadmia grew into Thebes with 7 gates. This was where legend met stone. Cadmus's story was not limited to war and city building. He had also become a favorite of the gods. They gave him Harmonia, whose beauty inspired songs, as his wife. Their wedding was among the most magnificent ceremonies mortals could witness. Even the gods attended, some on golden thrones, some descending in beams of light. At that wedding, there was a necklace gifted by the gods, placed around Harmonia's neck, yet destined to bring misfortune to generations to come. A cursed jewel, a necklace. From Cadmus and Harmonia descended the kings of Thebes. From time to time, the city faced ruin and at other times triumph. Yet the root of everything lay in those first dragon's teeth, the warriors sprung from the earth, and the unwavering courage of a foreign prince. Centuries later, walking through the streets of Thebes, the wind still carries the name of Cadmus. That murmur rising between the stones reminds us, every city rises not merely on stones, but on stories. And the story of Thebes is one of the oldest epics, written by the hand of fate itself, foretelling a tragedy no one could escape. The first light of dawn gently caresses the sky as one pauses before the stone gates of Thebes. The stillness of a city just awakening drapes over us like a thin veil. The wooden beams of the gate have darkened over time. The iron nails embedded in them glisten with a pale light in the morning chill. This gate has welcomed countless people and witnessed countless stories through the centuries. Now one steps into those stories. The very moment a foot touches the first stone, it is felt. This city, like its legends, is alive. Even the slight vibration of the stone road sounds almost like a heartbeat. The streets are narrow yet safe, curling and intertwining in a peaceful, labyrinthine chaos. The walls of the houses are yellowish, built from stones kissed by the sun, and from beneath the tiled roofs, morning smoke rises gently. That thin smoke carries the scent of freshly baked bread and newly pressed olive oil through the stone streets. Passing a house, one sees an elderly woman sitting at its doorstep, spinning thread. Her hands twist and thin the yarn with almost invisible speed. The unshaking patience of her hands moves to a rhythm learned over decades. Beside her, a small basket holds skeins of purple-dyed thread. Evidently, she will take them to the marketplace with the first light of day. She nods slightly in greeting, her eyes carrying the wisdom of millennia, a familiar calm. It is as if she remembers every soul who has passed this way, knows every hero's story. Walking further down the street, small, well-tended gardens appear behind stone walls. Pomegranate trees, olive branches, and dew-soaked grass fill the gardens. The fragrance of the flowers blends with the morning chill. Lavender and sage float in a soft, mystical mixture. Each garden seems to reflect the character of its owner. A little further, the cheerful voices of children greet the passerby. Laughter rings from behind stone walls, mingling with the excitement of a simple game played on flat stones, whispering the city's hope. And then the entrance to the market appears. Here beats the heart of Thebes in this lively square. Even in the early hours, baskets are opened, stalls set up. The air takes on a different rhythm. The hum of the market, the scent of fruits, the gleam of olive oil, the invitation of freshly baked bread. On one stall, large dark olives are piled high. On a neighboring stand, fresh bunches of grapes sway, catching the morning sun. The seller lifts a cluster and shows it in the morning light. "Behold, this year's bounty," he says, his voice like a hymn of gratitude. In a corner, jars of bright golden honey are lined up. A young man beside them tells the story of the bees. "I watched them on their way to the morning fields. They spun in the sky as if dancing." Walking further, one comes upon the spice stall. The colors spill like paint across the stone floor. Red peppers, yellow turmeric, green thyme. These scents whet the appetite, but also whisper secrets carried from the city's past, an ancient magic. In the center of the market stands a baker. The scent of bread from his oven spreads across the square. The baker skillfully turns the wooden peel, wiping sweat from his brow. Elderly patrons sit around the market, conversing. An old man points to the sky. "Look," he says, "Cadmus sowed the first seeds in this land. If we eat from this table today, it means his story still lives among the stones." Those listening nod, for in this city, legends are not mere words, they are truths embedded in daily life. Years pass, and the line of kings reaches its way to King Laius and Queen Jocasta, the throne shadowed by a dark cloud. In his youth, Laius was cursed by Pelops himself because he had assaulted Pelops's illegitimate son, Chrysippus of Pisa. The weight of this great sin and Pelops' curse compounded the burden of a king without an heir on Laius's shoulders. Years went by, yet within the palace walls, no heir's cry was heard. Each childless season appeared to the people as a deficiency, a warning from the gods. Laius bore the weight of kingship crushed beneath the absence of an heir. Eventually, despair drove them to the temple of Apollo in Delphi to hear the dreadful words from the lips of the oracle. And the oracle whispered the most terrifying prophecy, like the hiss of a serpent. "A son will be born to you, but he shall kill his father and marry his mother, staining your bloodline." These words clung to the palace walls like a stamp of blood. The king and queen, intending to safeguard the throne, heard the curse upon their lineage. Then came the moment all their fears were realized. Queen Jocasta was pregnant. The arrival of the child was not a celebration for the throne, but the inevitable voice of prophecy. No longer an expected heir, but a calamity bearing his father's death. Now the story rises from its roots to the heart of power, reaching the grand gates of the royal palace. Approaching the palace gates, the massive, thick doors creak open, their sound echoing through the courtyard. Inside, the smell of cold stone and profound silence spreads. One steps into a vast, stone-paved courtyard. Though crowded by day, at night the courtyard descends into tranquility. Only the soft whisper of the wind and a few murmurs accompany. In the corners, guards appear, their spear tips catching the moonlight. sparkling like a wink. A few servants move quietly, leaving the bustle of day behind and preparing for the night. They do not rush. Their footsteps barely disturb the silence of the courtyard. Moving deeper into the palace, corridors stretch long and are dimly lit. Flickering torch flames dance upon the walls. On each step, patterns etched into the stone reveal themselves. Battles of heroes, the wrath of gods, the founding of cities. It is as if even the palace walls are books of stories. Touch the cold stone, yet inside stories simmer. From a room, soft voices are heard. Peeking in, Queen Jocasta sits at the head of a table. The Queen of Thebes appears wise and resolute, her face showing both fatigue and unwavering determination. She is caught between the joy of motherhood and the terror of prophecy. Several servants stand by, carrying rolls of fabric. Jocasta occasionally lifts her head, her gaze wandering into the distance. Perhaps she recalls the prophecies, perhaps contemplates the weight of the future. Yet nothing betrays her thoughts. In silence, she exists only with the flicker of candlelight. From another wing, harsh footsteps echo. It is King Laius, the ruler of Thebes, bearing the weight of crown and throne upon his shoulders. His steps are heavy, harsh, yet within his eyes lies a shadow, something resembling fear, perhaps the burden of prophecy. One realizes that even the strongest appear at times deeply wounded within. As the corridors continue, walls grow heavier, silence deepens. It is as if every corner holds a hidden secret. Knowing that these secrets will one day come to light evokes both curiosity and a strange unease. For every stone laid within Thebes' walls will witness the events of the future unflinchingly. Finally, as the terrible prophecy takes flesh within the palace walls, the silence is replaced by a chilling horror. King Laius's fear sets a barrier before reason and fatherly instinct. It is a moment of mental eclipse. He seeks to subvert the word of the gods, to protect not only his throne and life, but the name of his lineage and the future of his city. In his eyes, there is neither mercy nor paternal feeling, only an obsession to escape the orbit of the curse. Thus, a dark and irreversible decision is made. The child must not live. The innocent baby faces a death sentence rather than a crown. Laius' command spreads through the palace like a cold whisper. To carry out the order, not an executioner, but one of the king's most trusted, loyal, and conscientious servants is chosen. This duty is no honor, it is a source of shame. When the servant takes the baby in his arms, he feels the tiny body's warmth and vulnerability. Yet the king's order is as cold and sharp as a winter wind. Under Laius's cruel command, the infant's ankles are bound with thick, coarse ropes, cruelly tight enough to cut the skin and press the bones. The ropes not only tear the flesh but obstruct circulation, turning the flesh dark. This act is not only a death sentence, but a mockery of fate. For it will determine the child's name known across Greece, Oedipus, swollen foot. This mark becomes the first and most painful sign of his Theban royal lineage. The deep, permanent wounds on his ankles will endure forever, a seal nothing, neither crown nor precious necklace, can erase. The king summons his servant one final time, repeating the order with cold resolve. The child will be left on the remote peaks of Mount Cithaeron, the gateway to Thebes' wilderness, to the wild beasts and eagles. The servant feels as if a dagger pierces his heart, carrying the swollen, bloodied infant like a bundle of disaster, secretly moving him from the palace under the cover of shadows. Walking through the palace courtyard, the servant senses behind him the salty scent of Queen Jocasta's hidden tears, and the breath of the king's cold fury in the dark corridors left behind. As he ascends the mountain, the infant's weak, broken cries mingle with the moan of pines and oaks. Each step torments his conscience further. He is a royal guard serving Thebes, not an executioner. Carrying out a baby's death order shatters all his loyalty. As he nears the summit, the mountain's cold and biting wind grows stronger, and the voice of his conscience rises. This task is cursed, yet the baby is innocent. Divine justice surpasses a king's command. Finally, the servant reaches the most desolate point of Mount Cithaeron, on the edge of Theban territory, where wind and sky rule, and even mountain goats rarely appear. Not a fragment of hope remains in his heart. He considers leaving the baby at the base of a rock, or hanging him by the cruelly bound ankles from a gnarled, dead branch. He struggles to withdraw his hands from the tiny body. One last pang of grief. At that moment, a sharp cry comes from the other side of the mountain, a shepherd tending his flock. It is divine intervention, an unexpected turn provided by fate at the last moment. The shepherd is a loyal man, sun-tanned, familiar with mountains and roads, herding flocks not in Thebes, but in the distant lands of Corinth ruled by King Polybus. Hearing the crying, he finds the infant writhing in agony, ankles swollen and darkened. The baby seems frozen in pain, a tiny sculpture of helplessness. Laius's servant and the Corinthian shepherd represent two ends of fate. The servant, heeding the final voice of conscience, submits. Rather than stain his hands with blood, he entrusts the child to a stranger's mercy. With a pleading gaze, he implores the shepherd never to reveal this innocence to Thebes, to keep this terrible secret hidden forever among the mountains. The shepherd silently swears to guard the secret. Seeing the child wrapped in delicate cloth, ankles cruelly branded, the shepherd immediately senses noble blood. Such a tender bundle, stamped with such cruelty, cannot belong to ordinary parents. He takes little Oedipus to his own hut. His first act is to untie the deadly ropes and try to heal the swelling. He pities the child. He cannot leave him to die. Unwittingly, the shepherd seals the future of Thebes' throne with mercy, foiling Laius's plan to escape destiny. Fate, cloaked as mercy, takes another turn. The shepherd delivers the child to King Polybus of Corinth and his queen Merope, or Periboia, who had never had children. Within the gilded walls of Corinth, the child grows as a prince, unaware of his destiny to become the ruler of Thebes. Fate continues to weave its threads at this bloody crossroads, where everyone believes they have escaped destiny, yet destiny itself marches with the most powerful and unyielding steps. On the wind-beaten peaks of Mount Cithaeron, as a knot of fate was being untied in another city, on the fertile lands of Corinth, a palace lay buried in the silence of despair. As the curse of Thebes stretched over the mountains, the wealth and grandeur of Corinth paled under the shadow of a throne without an heir. This city, where the winged horse Pegasus was stabled at dusk, was a center of prosperity, its harbor filled with trading ships, its workshops alive with craftsmen laboring into the night. Every corner of the city shone with wealth and order, and its people lived in peace under the just rule of King Polybos and the compassionate Queen Merope. King Polybos was renowned for his wise judgments and unwavering justice. He had earned the love of his people and the respect of neighboring kingdoms. Queen Merope, a noblewoman from the distant lands of Doris, had won the hearts of the people with her grace and compassion. Under their reign, the city flourished, its walls grew ever stronger, and its treasury overflowed. Yet behind this brilliant facade, a deep sorrow echoed within the marble walls of the palace. The kingdom had no heir. Years passed. Seasons followed one another, and Queen Merope's arms remained empty. The palace's broad corridors had never been enlivened by the cheerful laughter of a child, The royal bed had not been blessed by the birth of an heir. Each dawn the queen woke with hope. Each sunset she confronted the emptiness in her heart. Offerings to the temples and prayers to the gods never ceased. Merope presented her most precious jewels to the goddesses, and with the deepest tears she pleaded for their favor. King Polybos, though maintaining composure before his people, would gaze at the stars from the palace balcony at night, consumed by anxiety about Corinth's future without an heir. A king's greatest legacy was a child to continue his line, and Polybos felt the crushing weight of knowing he might leave none. Whispers circulated in the palace. Nobles debated the throne's future among themselves, while the people shared the sorrow of this absence alongside their love for their rulers. For them, this was more than a matter of succession. It was a sign that the gods had withheld their favor. Each noble child born elsewhere deepened the palace's quiet mourning, dimming the hope in the hearts of the king and queen. This was a sorrow that wealth and power could not soothe, the absence of a future. It was precisely at such a moment, when hope was weakest, that fate extended its threads from Thebes to Corinth. On the mountain tops, a baby's life depended on the conscience of a servant and the mercy of a shepherd. The Theban servant, crushed under the weight of innocence in his arms, could not bring himself to leave the child to die. Trusting in divine justice, he encountered a foreign shepherd tending his flock on the far side of the mountain. This shepherd was one of King Polybos's most loyal servants, honest and kind-hearted. Seeing the desperation and plea in the Theban servant's eyes, he made the decision that would change the child's destiny without hesitation. He took the baby, swearing to keep this dreadful secret hidden among the mountains forever. When the shepherd brought the injured baby to his hut, he noticed the fine cloth and the cruel wounds on the child's ankles. It was clear this child did not come from an ordinary lineage. Filled with compassion, he wished to care for the baby as his own, yet he knew this divine gift had to be shared with the king and queen, who had longed for a child for years. After a long and exhausting journey, he arrived at the gates of the Corinthian palace, carrying the precious charge. The guards, seeing the shepherd in his tattered, weary state, initially refused entry, but the shepherd's insistence and the baby's faint cries eventually opened the palace doors. When he presented the child to King Polybos and Queen Merope, kneeling before them, the heavy, sorrowful silence of the palace was pierced by the tiny cries of the infant. The queen, upon seeing the small injured being, rushed toward it with all the maternal affection she had held inside for years. Tears fell from her eyes at the sight of the deep, bruised wounds on the baby's ankles. King Polybos saw in this unexpected visitor an answer to prayers, a sign for the future of his kingdom. They did not question, they did not hesitate. They embraced the child as a gift sent from the heavens, holding him as if he were their own flesh and blood. The swelling on his ankles would give him a name known throughout Greece, Oedipus, meaning swollen foot. This name would become the indelible mark of both his orphanhood and his new identity. That day, the mournful walls of the Corinthian palace were lit with the joy of a family made whole. The people celebrated the arrival of their new prince for days, unaware that he carried Thebes' curse. He was now Corinth's hope. Oedipus grew up among the gilded walls of Corinth, unaware that he was the cursed heir of the Theban throne, enjoying all the privileges and love afforded to a prince. As years flowed like rivers, the injured infant transformed into a young man with a mind sharp as a blade and a body strong as a lion's. King Polybos and Queen Merope constantly reminded him of their love, raising him as their own, nurturing him with care. Within this environment of love and security, Oedipus acquired all the virtues a ruler must possess. He studied under the wisest teachers, trained with masterful warriors, excelled in every contest, and impressed elders with his wisdom in every debate. He sat with philosophers from Athens, travelers from Egypt, absorbing their stories and knowledge like a sponge. His intelligence was capable of solving the most intricate puzzles, a gift that would one day make him both a hero and lead him to his greatest catastrophe. His life flowed amid the warmth of a loving family and the bright promises of the future. He ran through palace gardens, rode his horse across Corinth's lush plains. The people loved him, looking to him with hope as their future king. Polybos and Merope took pride in him, seeing the future of their kingdom in his brilliant mind and unwavering will. Oedipus was the center of attention at every feast and celebration, admired by young girls for his handsomeness and envied by young men for his strength and courage. Yet the threads of fate, woven invisibly, tugged at even the happiest moments, pulling the ground from beneath the firmest footing. Oedipus's happiness was but a thin veil over a terrible truth, poised to be torn by the poisoned tongue of wine and jealousy. When Oedipus reached manhood, a grand feast was held in his honor at the palace. Wine jugs emptied, the sounds of the lyre and laughter echoed beneath the high ceilings. All praised the young prince's strength, agility, and wisdom. But among the guests, one whose tongue was loosened by wine and whose heart darkened by envy, whispered a poisonous word, shattering the night's joy. Passing by Oedipus, he leaned close with a mocking smile and whispered two words: "Illegitimate child." Those words pierced Oedipus's heart like daggers. The feast's joy froze. The music stopped. Laughter caught in throats. That night, sleep eluded him. A single question hammered in his mind: who am I? This question began to gnaw at his soul like a wolf. Everything he had known and believed until that moment was shaken. The next day he sought his mother and father, the people he believed to be his parents. He told them of the doubt and fear gnawing at his spirit. Polybos and Merope angrily dismissed the rumor, repeating again and again their love for him and that he was truly their child. Queen Merope embraced him through tears, and King Polybos swore to punish the offender with the harshest of measures. Oedipus never doubted their love, yet the wolf that had entered his heart continued to gnaw at his soul. Now in every glance and every word, he searched for a hint about his identity. This uncertainty, this quest for self, ultimately led him to the source of truth, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, where the voice of the gods could be heard. Without informing his parents, he secretly left the palace one midnight. This was his journey alone, a truth he had to face by himself. This first step, taken to escape his fate, was in fact the beginning of the path that would carry him straight into the heart of destiny. Oedipus, crushed under the weight of that poisonous whisper lodged in his heart, left behind the safe walls of the Corinthian palace. The words "adopted child" echoed in the deepest corners of his soul, forcing him to question every truth he knew, every love he believed in. He did not doubt the sincerity in the eyes of Polybos and Merope, the parents he had always known. Their love was as deep and unquestionable as an ocean. Yet he longed to know the source of that love. He sought the foundation of his own existence, his roots. This search was not mere curiosity, it was a spiritual necessity. Living without knowing who he truly was had become impossible. And so, one midnight, when the pale light of the moon illuminated the marble corridors, he slipped away from the palace into the shadows without whispering a word of farewell. Behind him, he left not just a kingdom, but the only home he had ever known. Before him stretched the steep roads of uncertainty and truth. This was his first and most relentless struggle with destiny, the endless agon of a man seeking knowledge against the silence of the gods. His journey took him into the heart of Greece, to the towering slopes of Mount Parnassus. With every step, the weight of doubt within him grew heavier. By day he walked under the scorching sun, by night under the cold, distant gaze of the stars. Every stranger he encountered along the way stoked the fire of the question in his mind, "Who am I?" As he left the orderly and secure roads of Corinth, the land became wilder, the paths more rugged, as if the change in the outside world mirrored the storm within him. Trails turned rocky, forests thickened, rivers ran more fiercely. This harsh geography tested him both physically and mentally. At times he stayed in inns, listening to travelers' stories, searching for a clue or a sign about his past in each tale. At other times he spent the night in the humble hut of a shepherd, trying to find solace in the simple but wise words spoken by the fire. Yet the answer he sought was not to be found in mortal tongues. The truth he pursued was hidden in the sacred place where the breath of the gods touched the earth, Delphi. After days of arduous travel, when the peaks of Parnassus appeared on the horizon, Oedipus's weary heart began to beat with hope once more. As he approached Delphi, he felt the air shift, becoming more mystical, heavier. The wind whispered through the leaves, as if carrying tales of ancient gods, forgotten heroes and fulfilled prophecies. The path to the temple was adorned with offerings from around the world, prayers filled with hope or fear. As he climbed the slopes, he encountered countless pilgrims also in search of answers. A king praying for victory, a woman seeking a lost love, a young warrior hoping to learn what the future held. The expressions on their faces mirrored his own inner state: fear, anxiety, confusion, and the complex mixture of hope. Finally, standing before the majestic entrance of Apollo's temple, his breath caught. Massive columns stretched to the sky, and the carvings on the stone walls immortalized the legends of gods and heroes. The temple's atmosphere was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. As he stepped inside, the air thick with incense and the incomprehensible murmurs of the oracles greeted him. This was a place where the divine and the mortal intersected, where time and space seemed to lose meaning. Oedipus felt crushed under the weight of this sacred place. He was no longer the powerful prince of Corinth, but a helpless mortal kneeling before the gods. After a long wait, he was finally admitted to the presence of Pythia, the chief priestess, whose voice was the echo of Apollo on earth. The temple's innermost chamber was filled with mysterious vapors rising from the floor. The priestess sat entranced on a three-legged tripod. Her eyes were closed, yet she seemed to see far beyond this world. Her voice was not human, but a whisper from the depths of the earth itself. Oedipus knelt before her, his heart pounding as if it would burst. Summoning all his courage, he asked the one question that had burned in his soul for months. "O mouthpiece of all-knowing Apollo, tell me, whose son am I?" A deep silence filled the room. Only the hissing of the vapors and the flickering of torches could be heard. The priestess did not speak at once. Oedipus waited, torn between hope and fear, as time seemed to freeze. Then her lips parted, but the sound that came forth was not an answer to his question. Horror and pity contorted her face, as if she had glimpsed the dark curtain of Oedipus's future and could not bear the vision. The god chose to leave his question unanswered, instead revealing the inevitable, his fate itself. Her voice pierced his soul like the hiss of a serpent. "Poor man, go away from here. Your destiny is the most terrible that can befall a mortal. You cannot escape what is written upon your brow. The path you walk will lead you to your own blood. You will kill the father who gave you life with your own hands." These words struck Oedipus like lightning. His mind went dark, his breath stopped, but the priestess did not relent, continuing to unveil the darkest veil of the curse. Her voice grew harsher, more precise. "And this is only the beginning of your disasters. You will enter the bed of your mother and marry her. From that sacred bed, you will bring forth a cursed lineage, both sibling and child. You will be child and spouse, father and brother, guilty and innocent, a disgrace to humanity, cursed by the gods." When the last words of the prophecy echoed and faded against the stone walls of the temple, Oedipus collapsed where he stood. The world, along with the sacred ground beneath his feet, seemed to crumble. The question of who he was, Prince of Corinth or adopted child, had lost its importance, replaced by the fear of what he would become and what he would do. He was no longer merely a bastard. He had become a monster, a helpless pawn sent into the world by fate to commit its most abominable sins. Oedipus was like a stone cast from the sacred temple of Delphi, hurled by the gods, a mortal with no knowledge of where he would land, his soul in shreds. The priestess's words echoed in the walls of his mind like sparks of fire, scorching the deepest corners of his being. "You will kill your father. You will marry your mother." These were not merely prophecies, they were a cursed brand stamped onto his very existence. Until that moment, he had been a young man searching for his identity. Now he had become a herald of disaster who knew what was to come. The bright light of the sun revealed the grandeur of Mount Parnassus, but he saw neither light nor landscape. Nothing existed in his mind but the pitch-black darkness that consumed him. It was the shadow of the dreadful future that squeezed his soul like a vice. The sharp intellect that had once solved riddles was now powerless before the insoluble puzzle of his own fate. Seeking the truth, he had confronted its most terrifying face, his own monstrosity. As he left the temple, his steps were uncertain, his soul tossed like a ship in a storm. His thoughts turned to the only refuge he knew, the peaceful palace of Corinth. Loving faces, King Polybos's wise and gentle gaze, Queen Merope's warm, maternal smile. They were his only family, his only safe harbor. And now the gods told him he would set that harbor ablaze with his own hands, stain those loving hands with blood. The thought was more painful than a dagger to the heart. It was impossible. He could not strike the man he called father, nor defile the sacred bed of the woman he called mother. In that moment, he made the most important decision of his life. This was not just a moment of fear, but an act of rebellion against the gods of fate. Fate may have drawn a path for him, but he would deviate from it by his own will. He would break their game, challenge them. His feet would never take him back to Corinth. He would not return to that beloved city, to those loving people. Oedipus would leave behind the only home he had ever known, and everything he loved, walking toward the unknown. He turned his face southward, not toward Polybos and Merope, but in the opposite direction. North to a place where he hoped the nets of fate would not reach under the stars. Yet he was unaware that the decrees of destiny operated like a clock. Every step he took carried him closer to the very heart of the curse he thought he was fleeing. As Oedipus approached the forked roads leading to Thebes, he was not merely a traveler. He was walking as both the hero and the victim of his own tragedy. Days chased nights, and nights chased days. Oedipus was no longer a prince nor a young man in search of answers. He was only a shadow moving wherever his steps carried him. By day, he walked the dusty, rocky paths under the merciless sun of Greece. His sandals were torn, his clothes tattered. By night he would curl beneath an olive tree or stay in an inn, blending in among other travelers. Yet sleep brought him no peace. Every time he closed his eyes, the oracle's icy voice rang in his ears, and the most terrifying visions filled his mind. In his dreams, he saw his beloved father's face drenched in blood and read indescribable shame in his mother's eyes. Each time, he awoke in a sweat of blood, his heart pounding as if it would pierce his chest. Throughout his journey, he encountered countless people, cheerful merchants, weary farmers, young lovers full of hope for the future, and elderly souls burdened by the past. Observing their simple lives, small troubles and modest joys, he felt the weight and horror of his own fate even more deeply. He burned with the pain of being unable to be like them, of having no right to even the simplest happiness. He avoided speaking to them, avoiding eye contact. It was as if his cursed destiny was written on his brow, as if people would recoil from him as from a leper. Thus he chose solitude, preferring to remain alone with his dark thoughts. His mind never rested. Why had the gods played such a cruel game with him? If fate was inevitable, what meaning did human will and choice have? Was he guilty or merely a toy in the hands of the gods? These questions pierced his mind like poisoned arrows, yet offered no answers. All he knew was that he had to fight. His love for Polybus and Merope gave him strength in this senseless struggle. Protecting them, keeping them from this disaster, had become his only purpose in life. This love was his shield against the curse. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Oedipus lost track of time and place. When the paths he walked brought him to the cursed three-way junction in Phocis, where the roads from Daulis and Delphi met, he did not even notice. The pass was narrow, squeezed between mountains. 3 roads from different directions twisted together like a serpent before continuing their separate paths. It was as if 3 threads of fate intersected here briefly. Then each continued to weave its own tragedy. The midday sun hung overhead, the air heavy and stifling. Around him, only the silence of rocks and withered shrubs remained. Even the wind was still. Oedipus moved forward with weary steps through this eerie silence. As he reached the narrowest point of the pass, he heard the wheels of a carriage approaching. As the sounds drew near, the splendor of the carriage became visible. It was clearly that of a noble. Wooden carvings, shining wheels, and strong horses marked its presence. Inside sat an elderly man, noble and commanding, his hair streaked with gray. Several servants accompanied him, one holding the reins of the horses, another walking ahead with a staff. When the guide saw Oedipus, he shouted with a rude expression, "Out of the way, wretch, make way for the royal carriage." The blood in Oedipus's veins froze. Months of relentless travel, sleepless nights, and the burden of the curse gnawing at his soul turned instantly into fury. He was no longer the Prince of Corinth, but his honor remained intact. No one would treat him like a common vagrant. Standing tall, he replied, "The road is wide enough, you may pass to the side. I owe no one my way." This unexpected defiance enraged the guide further. "I told you to move, scoundrel," he bellowed, attempting to shove Oedipus with his staff. It was a merciless clash of 2 wills, 2 vanities, a struggle confined in a narrow pass. Oedipus shoved the guide forcefully. At that moment, as he passed the carriage, the elderly, noble-looking man inside struck Oedipus on the head with a double-ended whip tipped in metal. The blow was sharp, burning. Oedipus felt a hot sting at his temple. His vision momentarily darkened, and in that instant, every dam within him broke. The oracle's words, the weight of fate, and the months of suppressed despair erupted like a volcano. At that moment, he recognized neither king nor law. This was not merely an assault on his honor, it was an insult to his entire being, to humanity itself. He gripped the sturdy oak staff tightly. His eyes blazed with fury. Like a lion leaping on its prey, he first struck the nearest guide. A single blow of the staff sent the man lifeless to the ground. He then turned to the coachman. The man panicked, dropping the reins and attempting to flee, but Oedipus was faster. One strike sent him sprawling among the horses. Only the old man in the carriage and a servant behind remained. The elderly man, face filled with shock and fear, tried to reach for his sword, but Oedipus gave him no chance. He struck at the hand that had whipped him, at that arrogant face, with all his strength. The sound of the staff echoed in the silence of the pass like dry bone snapping. The old man collapsed inside the carriage without a single cry, then his lifeless body slowly tumbled to the ground. The last servant, witnessing the horrific scene, fled into the nearby rocks in terror and disappeared from sight. Oedipus did not even notice. His gaze was fixed. It all happened within seconds. In the middle of the pass, only the overturned carriage, lifeless bodies, and frightened horses remained. Oedipus breathed heavily, noticing the blood dripping from his staff. His mind slowly cleared. He had become a killer, yet he felt no regret, only a cold sense of righteousness. They had started it. They had attacked. He had only defended himself and his honor. He did not look back. Scaring the horses, he moved them aside, passed the lifeless bodies calmly, and continued on his way. Unaware that this act had opened the first bloody chapter of his fate, he thought only that he had preserved his honor. Leaving the three-way junction behind, one thought filled his mind. He was far enough from Corinth. Now he was safe. Phosis's narrow three-way pass was now behind him, yet the warmth of the blood spilled there, and the solid bony crack he felt at the tip of his staff still lingered in the palms of his hands. Oedipus was not thinking about the lifeless bodies he had left behind. His mind was occupied with the cold and clear illumination of a momentary rage. This was not a moment of regret. Rather, it was a moment in which his existence had solidified, and his will had been forged in its own steel. He had delivered the punishment due to an affront, a haughty arrogance that dared to block his path. It was a just equation. The cost of insult had been paid in the language of violence. Yet still, the echo of the last breaths that resonated in that silent pass summoned the oracle's icy voice from Delphi, from the depths of his soul. You will kill your father. This prophecy was no longer a distant whisper. It was now the bloody echo of what his own hand was capable of. He had thought that fleeing Corinth had proven his loyalty to Polybus. Now, however, he realized he could destroy any father, any elderly man in a moment of anger. He had become a killer. This truth was heavier and more tangible than the prophecy of fate itself, for this was not the word of gods, but the undeniable consequence of his own actions. With this thought, he quickened his pace, as if trying to put distance not only between himself and that bloody gorge, but also from the dark possibility within him, walking toward a horizon whose name he did not know. The roads he walked drew him toward the fertile yet now sorrowful lands of Boeotia, under the shadow of Thebes with its 7 gates. As he approached the city, he began to notice the change in both nature and human faces. Where once farmers joyfully tended their fields, now silent, hopeless people gazed at the horizon with deep concern. Passing through villages, the cheerful laughter of children was absent. Curious eyes did not peer from the windows. Houses were tightly shut, like tombstones refusing to let any life escape. The air was heavy, not only with the imminence of a storm, but with the tangible weight of grief pressing down on the land. Roads had become desolate, paths once bustling with merchant caravans and travelers, now hosted only the howling wind and the weary sound of Oedipus's steps. When he stopped for the night at an inn by the roadside, he overheard the whispers of a family from Thebes, clothed in rags, their eyes bulging with fear. The man, shaking as he clutched his wine cup, spoke to his wife. "I saw it with my own eyes," he rasped. "My neighbor Leandros, a brave man, set out to bring goods to the city. It's a riddle," he said. "Only the wise can solve it." But he never returned. A search party found only his shattered cart and a few gnawed bones beneath the cliff. There were no claw marks, no bite wounds. It was as if his soul had been forcibly torn from his body. The woman covered her mouth in terror. "But how?" she whispered. The man turned his gaze to Oedipus as if he were part of this cursed knowledge. "That is the unknown, woman. He was killed not by a sword but by a word, a question, one that devours the mind of the one who cannot answer it and crushes their soul." Oedipus tried to piece together in his mind the portrait of the terrible creature from these fragmented accounts. Its name was Sphinx. Even the meaning of the name, the Strangler, was a whisper of terror. According to the tales, the creature embodied all the contradictions and wildness of nature in a single body. Its torso was that of a muscular and powerful lion, every step shaking the earth, each claw as sharp as a sword, carrying the unstoppable strength of the predatory beast. Yet upon this animal power were the broad, majestic wings of an eagle. These wings gave it not only the ability to fly, but also the dominion of the skies, the ruthless gaze of the predatory bird observing its prey from above with divine scrutiny. The combination of these two powerful beings united the fiercest elements of earth and sky in one body. Yet what made the Sphinx truly terrifying was the human element imposed upon these animal forms, the head and chest of a woman. As a prince, Oedipus had heard of male-headed androsphinxes guarding the serene temples of Egypt, or Assyrian bullmen crowned with beards and authority. They symbolized pharaonic power and divine order. The curse of Thebes, however, was something entirely different. It was not a lawgiver, but a lawbreaker. That face bore neither the nobility of a queen nor the wisdom of a goddess. Instead, it presented a contradiction that upended the human mind, smashing the most fundamental categories. A woman's lips, eyes, and hair. But behind those eyes lay neither compassion nor understanding. They stared coldly, empty as the unfathomable depths of a riddle. The lips opened not for sweet words, but to whisper the incomprehensible challenge that drove men to madness. As the Belgian writer Bouchau described in his novel, she was the daughter of the forests, a primordial force adorned with wildflowers, both white and black, a riddle from beyond the boundaries of civilization. She was lion and bird, woman and serpent, a monstrous being uniting all forms of nature in one body, a creature even gods feared to name. This entity was the embodiment of Dionysian chaos, the exact opposite of Apollonian order and reason. This monster was not merely a carnivore. Her method was more merciless, more refined. On the rocky road leading to the city, she sat patiently, stopping every traveler who passed. She did not attack them, she did not tear them apart. She merely stared and posed a question. No one knew the question exactly, for none survived hearing it. But according to the accounts, it was a question that shattered a person's mind, logic, and all they thought they knew. The traveler who could not answer did not perish by the Sphinx's claws, but by the collapse of his own mind, crushed under the weight of his helplessness. Her terror arose not from physical violence, but from mental torment. She hunted not bodies, but souls. The people of Thebes had shut themselves inside their homes in fear. The city, once a vibrant and bustling center, had become a ghost town, and the menace of the Sphinx was not alone. Death stalked the city itself. Crops withered, women bore dead children. A fever, a plague swept through, decimating the lineage of Cadmus. This double calamity had broken the spirit of the people. Creon, who had taken the throne after the mysterious murder of King Laius, had promised in desperation, whoever could save the city would be granted not only the throne of Thebes, but also the hand of the widowed Queen Jocasta. This was as much a reward as it was a cry of hope, laying the city's two most precious treasures at the feet of the unknown hero. As Oedipus listened to these stories, he felt the old fire within him reignite after the dark whispers of Delphi. The oracle had painted a dreadful future, yet it required him to be a passive victim. Oedipus was no victim. He was a man who had solved problems with his mind and strength all his life. Fleeing Corinth, he had escaped the role fate had offered him. Now, fate presented him with a challenge that was tangible and solvable. Was this a game of the gods, or an opportunity for him to carve his own path? The Sphinx was not only a monster, but also a riddle, like his own identity, like his own future. Perhaps confronting this creature was a step toward confronting the dark enigma within himself. Perhaps becoming the savior of Thebes was also a way to free himself from his cursed destiny. He had rejected a future as a prince of Corinth. Now, as king of Thebes, he could construct a new future. He would become a Tyrannus, a ruler not by inheritance, but by merit, by his own intelligence. This would be the greatest agon, the greatest struggle, the effort to determine one's place among humans, gods, and monsters by the power of one's mind. Oedipus trusted his intellect, his desire to understand and solve everything, his hunger for knowledge. A riddle exists to be solved, and he was a man of answers. He looked into the fear-filled eyes of the fugitives, and a decision formed within him. While they fled in terror, he would walk toward the heart of that terror. While they left Thebes to survive, he would enter it to find himself. He turned his gaze to the silhouette of the seven-gated city shining under the sun. His steps were no longer those of a fleeing exile or a lost traveler. They were the determined steps of a man going to confront a monster, a riddle, and his own fate. As he approached the gates of Thebes, he saw in the distance the high cliff by the roadside. There was neither movement nor shadow upon it, but Oedipus knew the riddle awaited him there patiently. The road to Thebes grew even more ominous as the city's walls came into view. The path narrowed like the bed of a river, winding between steep cliffs on either side. This was the domain of the Sphinx, a cursed passage where every stone, every shadow whispered a tale of fear. The air had grown heavy, the birds' songs were silenced. Even the wind passing through the cliffs turned its howl into a moan. The edges of the road were littered with the decaying skeletons of abandoned wagons, torn fabrics and human bones caught in the branches. This was a place where hope died and reason faltered. In the midst of this silent tableau of terror, Oedipus advanced with determined steps, clutching a sturdy oak staff. And then he saw it. Perched atop a high rock at the narrowest point of the path, it was far more terrifying and incomprehensible than the stories had suggested. Its body was that of a lion, muscular and powerful, each claw as sharp as a sword. From its back rose the majestic wings of an eagle, challenging the sky itself, but the head and chest atop this beastly form were human, female. This face did not resemble the calm wisdom of the Androsphinxes guarding Egypt's temples, nor the might of the crowned bearded bullmen of Assyria. It was a daughter of the forests, a primal force adorned with wildflowers, both light and dark, a riddle from beyond the bounds of civilization. Its eyes were empty and cold, like the unfathomable depth of a riddle. Its lips did not speak sweet words, but whispered the inscrutable challenge that drove men to madness. It was a lion, a bird, a woman, and, according to some tales, had a serpent's tail, a creature that combined every form of nature, breaking carefully separated differences, bringing death and destruction in its wake. When Oedipus stood at the foot of the rock, the Sphinx slowly turned its head toward him. Their eyes met. Oedipus saw neither anger nor hunger in those eyes, only a cold, calculating intelligence. The Sphinx did not speak, yet its voice echoed inside Oedipus's mind like a reverberation. It was not a voice from lips, but a vibration that penetrated the depths of the soul. And that voice posed the first riddle, the famous, cursed question. Which creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at midday and 3 in the evening, and yet, contrary to nature, is weakest when it has the most legs? The question hung suspended in the silent air. Oedipus hesitated not for a moment. His mind was sharp as a sword, orderly as a clock. This was his domain, dissecting the logical layers of a question, finding the contradictions, and reaching the bare truth. Countless beings passed through his thoughts. 4-legged animals. They grew weak with age, but their number of legs did not change. Gods. They could change forms, but weakness was alien to them. Centaurs, satyrs, and other hybrid creatures, they were fixed in their nature. His mind moved like a runner seeking the right path in a labyrinth. Then his thoughts slowed, delving deeper. The key lay in weakness and the changing number of legs. It was a cycle of life, a beginning, a middle, and an end. He thought of his own life, a baby in a cradle, helplessly crawling on all 4s. Then a young man, upright, walking on 2 legs at the height of his strength. And finally, an old man, his strength depleted, relying on a cane, a 3rd leg. The answer was so simple, so evident, a truth others, blinded by fear, could not see. Oedipus lifted his head with a confident smile, and his voice echoed clearly and decisively through the silent passage. "Man," he said, "for man crawls on all 4s in childhood, walks on 2 legs in adulthood, and finally, in old age, uses a cane as a 3rd leg." No expression appeared on the Sphinx's face. The cold emptiness in its eyes rippled for a moment, like a stone tossed onto a still pond. But it did not accept defeat. This relentless battle of minds, this agon, was not yet over. The creature sought to test the limits of Oedipus's intellect, the boundaries of his logic. And then came the second riddle, this time more abstract, more philosophical. 2 sisters, one gives birth to the other, and the second is born from the first. This question made Oedipus pause for a moment. It was not a simple observational puzzle. It was a question about the cyclical nature of time and existence. Again, he thought of nature's cycles, the seasons, the phases of the moon, life and death. Yet none fit perfectly. Then a flash struck his mind, the fundamental duality of all that exists, the endless dance of light and darkness. One gives birth to the other. One loses meaning in the absence of the other. Day begets night, and night in its darkness gives way to day. They were simultaneously mother and child to one another. In an eternal cycle, one arose from the other. Oedipus raised his head once more, and his voice this time was even stronger. "Night and day," he said. For the first time, an emotion appeared on the Sphinx's face. It was neither anger nor disappointment, rather a mixture of surprise, even respect. The mortal before it was not only clever but wise, having transcended the limits of logic to grasp the fundamental rhythms of the universe. Yet Oedipus's victory brought him one step closer to the greatest trap. In the Sphinx's silence, a voice rose within Oedipus, a whisper, an intuition. "Do not answer. Say nothing but your name, Oedipus." In that instant, he experienced a moment of revelation. The true answer to the first riddle was not merely man, but himself. The baby abandoned to death on 4 limbs, the proud man walking on 2, the one who would one day crawl with 3. He was the riddle itself. Yet he suppressed this insight under the bright light of his intellect. He was the man of answers, not of vague intuitions. Without consulting gods or birds, he had silenced the beast, and now could savor this victory. The Sphinx understood that no more words were to be spoken, no more questions to ask. It was not merely a poser of riddles, but a guardian of a threshold. And Oedipus had crossed that threshold. In Greek mythology, sphinxes destroyed themselves when their riddles were correctly answered. From the creature's body arose a sound beyond human comprehension, both a scream and a lament. That sound echoed among the cliffs, struck the walls of Thebes, and returned. Then those majestic wings spread one last time, and the Sphinx cast itself from the high cliff. The crash to the ground sounded like a mountain collapsing. Then a deep, absolute silence fell. Oedipus walked to the edge of the rock and looked down at the shattered body below. The terror that had held Thebes for years was now nothing but a pile of flesh and bone. The air seemed to have changed. That heavy, suffocating grief had dispersed, replaced by a clean, fresh breeze. Oedipus drew a deep breath, tasting the intoxicating thrill of victory. He had conquered not only a monster, but fear, ignorance, and perhaps even his own doubts. He squared his shoulders, struck the staff on the ground, and turned his face toward the 7 gates of Thebes, now awaiting a savior. The Sphinx's shattered body lay at the base of the cliff, surrounded by the mocking silence of nature. The deafening scream that had just torn through the air had faded into the echoes of the mountains, leaving behind an almost supernatural stillness. Oedipus stood at the head of his strange, cold monument of victory, still gripping the oak staff tightly in his hands. The air had changed. The heavy, suffocating grief that had descended on Thebes like a nightmare had dispersed, replaced by a clean, fresh breeze. Oedipus drew a deep breath. The air he inhaled was not only the coolness of the mountains, but also the intoxicating, dizzying taste of victory. He had conquered not just a monster, but also the fear, ignorance, and ceaseless doubts that gnawed at his own soul. The cursed words of the oracle at Delphi now sounded only like a distant whisper in the depths of his mind. He could not be a murderer, a sinner. He was a hero who had solved fate's most terrible riddle with his mind. A hero who had defeated a monster even the gods had bowed before. The blood he shed at the Crossroads now shone under this light of triumph, justified as a fair struggle to uphold his honor. He was no longer an exile searching for his roots. He was a man who had built his own identity, his own value with his own intelligence. The future he had lost as the Prince of Corinth, he would reclaim as the savior of Thebes. He straightened his shoulders and turned his face toward the silhouette of the 7-gated city that now awaited its savior. Among the rocks, an old shepherd watched this incredible scene in frozen fear. He had entered this cursed pass, where no one dared approach due to terror, to search for a lost goat, and upon realizing the presence of the monster, had taken refuge in a crevice. For hours he had trembled there, waiting. Then he saw the stranger, that reckless traveler, arrive. His heart raced as he feared yet another victim would fall to the monster's claws. But what unfolded went beyond even his wildest imaginings. Expecting a struggle, the clash of claws, he had only heard the silent, deadly battle of words. The stranger's voice was clear and unwavering, answering the monster's eerie, mind-resonating questions without hesitation. And then the scream, that horrific, inhuman scream, followed by the crushing sound of its fall. The shepherd, curiosity mingled with fear, peered over the edge of the rock and saw the shattered body below, and the mysterious stranger standing tall above it. His terror gave way first to astonishment, then to uncontrollable, exuberant joy. The dark cloud that had hung over Thebes for years had dispersed. Children could once again play in the streets, caravans could travel the roads, and the city could breathe again. The old shepherd did not dare approach Oedipus's imposing, almost divine figure. He was no mere mortal, but a hero seemingly descended from Olympus. So, with all his strength and tears of joy streaming down his face, he began running toward the city. The thorns that pierced his feet and the branches that scratched his face mattered not. He had one goal: to bring this impossible news, this miracle, to the mourning walls of Thebes. Thebes itself lay silent at that moment, like a city on its deathbed. The shadow of the Sphinx had closed not only the roads to the city, but also the hearts of its people. Trade had ceased, fields remained unplanted. At night, only the anxious footsteps of watchmen and the whispering wind could be heard. By day, people feared leaving their homes, waiting for the next victim. The city had shut in on itself, despairing. The mysterious death of King Laius, followed by the terror of this monster, weighed on Thebes like a double curse. Creon's promise, instead of a beacon of hope, hung in the air like a cry of helplessness. And then, in the midst of this despair, chaos erupted at the city's southern gate. The old shepherd arrived, breathless, torn and ragged. The guards first thought him mad, but the wild gleam in his eyes, the mixture of joy and terror on his face, was no ordinary madness. "The monster is dead," the shepherd shouted, his voice hoarse from fatigue and excitement. "The Sphinx is gone. I saw it with my own eyes." These words first sparked a wave of whispers. A few at the gate could hardly believe the incredible news. "What are you saying, old man? Have you lost your mind?" But the shepherd persisted, recounting what had happened: the brave stranger, the riddles, and the monstrous end. As he spoke, his voice grew stronger, and the crowd around him expanded. The whispers became murmurs, the murmurs a roar. The news spread from mouth to mouth, street to street, like a forest fire. People who had kept their doors tightly shut for years first listened hesitantly. Then someone dared to open their door. A head peered out. They saw their neighbor do the same. A brief silence fell. Then, as if by an invisible signal, all doors opened at once. The people of Thebes poured into the streets in a crowd like never before. Everyone surrounded the shepherd, demanding he repeat the story. Doubt slowly gave way to excitement. A group of young men, unable to resist, drew their swords and ran toward the cursed pass. A curious crowd followed them. The rest of the city gathered in the agora and in front of the temples, praying and waiting for the news. Oedipus walked slowly and resolutely toward the city. He was no longer a fugitive searching for his identity. He was a hero walking toward victory. As he approached the city gates, he saw the armed youths running toward him. For a moment he recalled the bloody scene at the Crossroads and instinctively gripped his staff. But the young men's faces held not anger, but admiration and astonishment. They stopped when they saw him, and then one dared to ask, Is it you? Are you the man who killed the monster?" Oedipus merely nodded. This simple gesture acted like a key opening a floodgate. The joyful cries of the youth echoed through the mountains. The crowd behind them, witnessing the scene, shed their last doubts. The fear, grief, and helplessness they had carried for years erupted into volcanic joy. Thebes had never witnessed such a sorrow, nor such a celebration. As Oedipus entered the city, he was met by a human tide. People pressed forward, eager to touch him and confirm he was real. They did not see him as a god, but as a mortal who had accomplished the impossible through his own intelligence and courage, which made him even greater in their eyes. Even the blind prophet Tiresias, once a symbol of wisdom, had failed at a task that this stranger had solved alone. They lifted him onto their shoulders. "Savior!" they cried. "The savior of Thebes!" Women threw flowers from windows. Children ran around shouting his name. The city's gloom had turned into a carnival of celebration. In the midst of this flood of love, Oedipus forgot for a moment the dark temple at Delphi and the cursed words spoken there. He was no longer a victim of fate, but its master. Carried on the shoulders of his people toward the agora, he wore a proud smile. The day the Sphinx threw itself from the cliffs, giving its life, was not merely the destruction of a monster for the people of Thebes. It was the beginning of rebirth. The eerie fear that had loomed over the city like a nightmare now blended with the monster's shattered body, returning to the earth. The people of Thebes no longer closed their windows at night in terror, but in peace. Children ran joyfully through the streets again, and caravans entered the city gates safely. The architect of this new peace, the founder of this golden age, the clever stranger carried on the shoulders of the people to the palace, was Oedipus. This was his new identity. This was his new home. The city promised him not just a throne, but also the sense of belonging he had lost and sought. He was no longer the adopted child of Corinth. He was the father of a people, the savior of a city. As the crowd's exuberant voices filled the agora, the nobles of Thebes and Creon, acting on behalf of the throne, appeared on the marble steps of the palace. Creon waited for the crowd to settle, his face reflecting both deep relief and the gravity of a ruler. When the noise subsided, his voice carried across the square, each word ringing as if etched in stone. People of Thebes, the darkness that has hung over our city for years has today been dispelled by the wisdom and courage of this valiant stranger. The gods caused us suffering, but in our most desperate hour, they sent a savior. While we mourned our king Laius, we also struggled with the Sphinx's curse. In those days, before the gods and in your presence, I swore an oath. To the one who would free our city from this monster, I promised the sacred throne of Thebes and the hand of our grieving queen, Jocasta. Creon turned to Oedipus, signaling that he should descend from the shoulders of the crowd. Oedipus planted his feet firmly on the ground and stood tall before Creon. "Today," Creon continued, his voice reaching even the farthest corner of the square, "I fulfill this oath. Oedipus, new king of Thebes, the city is yours, its people are yours, our queen is yours." With these words, an earthquake-like applause erupted, deafening in the square. The people greeted their new king with cries of joy. Oedipus stepped forward. On his face was the noble bearing he had learned in the palaces of Corinth, but in his eyes shone the wisdom gained from the road and an unwavering confidence in his own intellect. "People of Thebes," he began, his voice cutting through the cheering crowd. "You see me as a savior, yet I was only a traveler walking the path shown by reason. Fate brought me to your city, and the gods used my wit as an instrument for your salvation. To rule this city is the greatest honor bestowed upon me. I swear to carry this city beyond the place Laius left, to heal your wounds, and to make Thebes shine again as the brightest star of Greece." He had become a ruler, a tyrannus who gained his throne not by inheritance but by merit. In the eyes of the people, his legitimacy came not from ancient bloodlines but from the city's deliverance. The celebrations lasted for days. Every corner of the city was adorned with laurel branches, and offerings of gratitude were made to the gods in the temples. Oedipus spent long hours with Creon and the city's elders, learning everything about Thebes' laws, ancient traditions, and people. His insatiable hunger for knowledge, epistemophilia, made him not only intelligent, but also wise as a ruler. Finally, the time came for marriage. It was not merely the union of two individuals, but also a symbol of the city's future. The marriage of the savior king and the grieving queen would seal Thebes' rebirth. Jocasta had withdrawn into the silence of her palace after her husband's death and the city's suffering. The news of the Sphinx's death and the arrival of the new hero brought her both relief and a new uncertainty. She knew Creon's promise. As queen, she had to set aside personal feelings for the welfare of the city. When she first met Oedipus face to face, she was struck by his youth, his confident bearing, and the brilliance in his eyes. In him, she glimpsed a faint resemblance to the husband she had lost years ago, Laius. It brought both solace and a strange sorrow. Yet the vision of the tiny baby she had left to die in the mountains years before was now impossible to imagine. That wound had long since healed, buried deep within her soul. She believed that the prophecy that her own sons would kill Laius was false, based on how events had unfolded. This marriage was a political necessity for her, a step to secure the city's future. Oedipus, in Jocasta's mature beauty, shaded by sorrow but still retaining her dignity, found in her the wisdom of a queen and the compassion of a woman. Between them was a pull neither could name, woven by the invisible threads of fate. They understood it as the closeness of two souls finding refuge in each other in difficult times. Their wedding became one of the grandest ceremonies Thebes had ever seen. The city shed its mourning garments and donned its brightest colors. When Oedipus sat upon the Theban throne, he was seen by his people not merely as a king, but as a blessing from the gods. His marriage to Jocasta acted as a balm healing the city's wounds. In time, they had 4 children, sons Eteocles and Polynices, daughters Antigone and Ismene. The palace was filled with children's laughter, and the city lived in prosperity. Oedipus ruled Thebes with wisdom and justice. His people loved and respected him. Years passed quietly behind Thebes' 7-gated walls, like a river flowing deep and calm. Oedipus buried in the depths of his mind the dark prophecy whispered by the Delphic oracle, believing he had escaped fate by fleeing Corinth and built his happiness through his own wit. But irony, like a hidden poison, awaited at the peak of his joy. The peace and prosperity of Thebes were, in truth, the strongest and most beautiful loop of the bloody web fate had woven. And the day came. At first it made itself known with faint signs. The heads of the crops in the fields yellowed and withered, as if scorched by a secret fire before they could fill out. Flocks grazing on the fertile pastures at the foot of Mount Dirphis fell ill one by one and perished. Then disaster crept inside the city's stone walls. Women who had carried their babies for 9 months with hope gave birth to dead children. The joys of childbirth were replaced by laments that burned the heart. Before long, an abhorrent plague-like catastrophe, one no one could name, fell on Thebes like a black cloud. Whispers said it was an echo of the plague that ravaged Athens in 430 BCE. The once vibrant crowds that filled the market had dispersed. People shut themselves up at home in fear. At night, the streets no longer rang with lyre music, but with groans and cries rising from sickbeds. The underworld god who rules the dead, dark Hades, was fed by those moans and screams. Life in the city had stopped. As in those black days of plague, social order in Thebes began to unravel. Neighbors fled from neighbors. The sick mother was abandoned by her child, the father by his son. Ancient rituals like funeral rites were suspended, and the dead were hastily thrown into mass graves. The strong bonds that once held Cadmus's children together were breaking one by one under the fear of death. Thebes withdrew into itself and lost hope. Even the terror brought by the Sphinx seemed more bearable next to this invisible, insidious enemy. At least that monster had a body and a riddle to be solved. This new enemy was everywhere and nowhere, in the air drawn into the lungs, in the water drunk, in the touch of a loved one. Days chased weeks, weeks chased months. Finally, the patience of the people of Thebes ran out. One morning, beneath the pale light of dawn, the palace steps filled again with a human tide. But this time, those who came were not there to celebrate a victory. They had come to plead for deliverance. People of every age were there, elderly men too weak to walk, mothers carrying their lifeless infants, youths whose faces had gone pale with fear. Each held branches of laurel and olive, the symbols of prayer and supplication. In the crowd stood a white-haired bent man who still bore his people's pain in his eyes. The priest of Zeus. The palace gates opened, and Oedipus appeared. On his face was the deep sorrow of a father who shares his people's suffering. He watched the crowd for a moment, then spoke in that familiar, reassuring voice. "Children of great Cadmus, why do you kneel before my palace with these supplication branches? From every quarter of the city rise incense smoke, funerary airs and groans. I did not want to hear your sorrow from others, my children. Here I am, Oedipus, whom you all know well, come before you personally." He then turned to the priest. "Speak, old man," he said. "It falls to you to speak on behalf of all. Why have you come here? Do you have a grievance, a fear? Know that I stand ready to help you with all my strength. I am not so unfeeling as to be unmoved by your kneeling and pleading before me." The priest stepped forward with heavy steps. His voice was weary but clear. "Oedipus, ruler of our land, you see those who kneel before the altars. Some of us are like fledglings not yet able to fly. Some are priests bent with old age. I am Zeus's priest. The people with branches in hand sit in the squares before Pallas's twin shrine and before the ashes of the seer Ismenos. You can see for yourself, the city can no longer withstand the storm of disaster that has fallen upon it. Crops and flocks perish, infants are stillborn. An abhorrent plague-like scourge rages, destroying Cadmus's children." The priest paused a moment and fixed his eyes on Oedipus. "All of us gathered here, and I too know that you are not a god. Yet we also know that in such a time of disaster, when we are in need of the gods' aid, you stand strongest among mortals. For you, without asking anyone and knowing little more than we do, freed us from that cruel monster that exacted a toll from us. By the gods' help, you saved our lives. Everyone knows it. Everyone says so. Today, Oedipus, beloved by us all, we have come to ask you for help, the wisest among mortals. Remember your honorable past. Save the city. Revive it. What use is an empty fortress, an empty ship, without people?" Oedipus was deeply shaken by these words. The people's trust in him made the burden on his shoulders even heavier. "My unfortunate children," he said, his voice full of compassion and sorrow. "I know well what you have come to ask of me. I feel how each of you suffers. Believe me, no one among you has felt pain more keenly than I have. While each of you burns with your own sorrow, I mourn for all of you, for Thebes, and for myself. Know that you have not let me sleep peacefully. Know that I have shed many tears and worn my mind thin." Oedipus paused, then continued with the dignity of a ruler ready to announce his decision. "After careful thought, I found but one remedy, and I acted on it. To learn what I should do and say to save the city, I sent Minucius' son, my wife's brother Creon, to the Pythian temple to Thebes. Days have come and gone, and he still has not returned. This worries me. What did he do? Where might he be? As soon as he returns, if I do not carry out the god's command, I will have committed the greatest crime myself." At that moment there was a commotion on the road to the palace. One of the guards called out, "My king, Creon is coming!" Everyone turned that way. Though bearing the dust of a long journey, Creon's step was brisk. A wreath of laurel, an emblem of victory and good tidings from Delphi, adorned his head. Oedipus called to him at once, "My wife's brother, my closest to the palace. What answer has the god given us?" Creon stood before the crowd and the king. "A good answer," he said. "Even from the worst calamities, fortunate outcomes may arise." Oedipus did not like that indirect phrasing. "If you will speak before everyone, I am ready to listen," Creon said. "If you will not, let us go inside the palace." But Oedipus, showing that his people's suffering mattered more than his own, replied, "Speak in front of everyone. Their pain weighs on me more heavily than my own." Thereupon Creon announced the clear and terrible message of the god. "Thebes, Apollo, commands us to purge from our land without delay the defilement that breeds within our own soil." Oedipus was astonished. How are we to cleanse this defilement when we do not even know what it is? Creon's answer cast a new shadow over Thebes. By driving the blood-guilty from this land, or by cleansing blood with blood, our misfortunes have come for this reason. Blood had been shed, and until that stain was cleansed, the city could not be purified. "Well then," asked Oedipus, "who is the man whose blood has been spilled?" Creon answered hesitantly, "Oedipus, before you took this land, Laius ruled Thebes. Laius was killed. The god now clearly demands that we take vengeance for him and punish whoever shed his blood. Laius and the old king said to have been killed years ago at a crossroads by robbers." Oedipus strained his mind. Why had that murder not been solved then? Creon told what he knew. Laius had set out to consult the oracle and did not return. Only one of his companions, a slave, had escaped. According to his account, Laius had been killed not by a single man, but by a band of robbers. The reason the murder could not be pursued was the Sphinx that had befallen the city at that very time. The monster's endless riddles had so consumed the minds of the Thebans that they could think of nothing else. After hearing everything, Oedipus stood up. On his face was that old determination of one about to solve a riddle. "Very well," he said. "I will take up this matter from its beginning and uncover it. Thebes is justified from earth to sky. I am with you. I accept upon myself the god's cause for Thebes. I will try to cleanse this stain not only for distant friends, but also for myself. Whoever has blood on their hands may have also sought my life. By avenging him, I will also have protected myself." He was a judge pursuing his own crime, and each step he took drew him closer to the cursed truth he had been fleeing. Oedipus told his people to go home and leave everything to him. As the crowd dispersed, Oedipus, confident in his intellect and proud, was sure he would solve this new riddle as well. He issued a decree to all Thebes to find Laius's killer. The decree read, "If any among you knows who killed Laius, son of Labdacus, I command you to inform me. Even if you yourself committed the murder, do not fear to come forward. You will not be put to death. Your punishment will be exile from this land. If you keep silent, if one of you seized by fear refuses to reveal his friend or himself, I will say what will happen. I forbid that man from speaking to anyone, from taking him into your houses, from joining in prayers and offerings. The priest of the python has declared this openly. I also command it. This foul creature who pollutes us all shall be cast out from every hearth. He summoned Thebes' blind seer Tiresias to begin his investigation. Though sightless, Tiresias was a sage who had grasped the secrets of truth, understanding the language of birds and the whispers of the gods. Oedipus's men brought the aged seer to the palace, guided like a child. Oedipus approached him with respect. Tiresias, you who perceive all on earth and in heaven, the known and the unknown, though your eyes see nothing, you must know the calamity that has befallen our city. There is no one else to help or save us. If we do not find and punish the murderer of Laius, there is no remedy for our plight. Spare us nothing. But Tiresias's face was heavy with sorrow. Alas, too much alas! Knowledge, when it harms the knower, what a dreadful thing it is, he said, unwilling to speak. Let me go. Believe me, it is better for both of us. Oedipus's insistence gradually turned to anger. His unending hunger for the truth, this dangerous curiosity, made him unstoppable. So you know and yet refuse to speak? Do you not see that you betray us and destroy our land? He roared. The old seer could no longer endure the pressure and delivered the first blow of fate with a shout. You are the shame of this land, the hand that has defiled it. You are the murderer we seek. The words struck like lightning in the palace courtyard. Oedipus froze, then rage overtook reason. It must be Creon's plot. His brother-in-law, coveting the throne, had deceived the old seer, making him speak lies. Had your eyes seen, I would have said it was you who did this, he shouted at the seer. Mocking Tiresias's blindness, Oedipus himself was blind to the truth. In a tragic irony, he accused the seer of being blind while proudly calling himself seeing. Tiresias, pitying Oedipus's blind pride, whispered his final and most terrible prophecy. You will see yet be blind, wealthy yet reduced to poverty, wandering foreign lands leaning on a staff. More still, your children will be both your siblings and your offspring. The woman who bore you will be both your wife and your mother. Children will be born to your father's wife. You will kill your father. With these words, Tiresias departed the palace, leaving Oedipus alone in the darkness of suspicion and rage. Consumed by his conspiracy theory, Oedipus summoned Creon and accused him of treason. A heated argument erupted. Creon tried to prove his innocence, offering reasoned evidence. Even if I have certain rights, would I ever prefer the troubles of power over my peace? To live like a king is better for me than to be king. Yet Oedipus's mind, poisoned by suspicion, would not hear him. Just as he was about to inflame the quarrel and issue a death sentence against Creon, the palace doors opened and Queen Jocasta intervened. What is this? Will you quarrel in vain? Does it suit you to fall out over personal grievances while the city suffers such calamity? Jocasta attempted to calm them. When Oedipus explained that Creon had accused him of killing Laius, Jocasta unknowingly introduced the second and most shocking instrument of fate to console him. Do not distress yourself in vain. Listen to me. Know this. No mortal understands prophecy, she said. And as proof, she recounted the tragedy of their own lives. Laius had received a prophecy that his unborn son would kill him, yet it had not come to pass. For Laius was killed by robbers at a crossroads, and the baby was abandoned to die on a desolate mountain with his feet bound. Jocasta's intention was to ease Oedipus, but her words had the opposite effect. Lightning struck in his mind. "Wait," he said, his voice hoarse. "You said Laius was killed at a crossroads?" Jocasta confirmed, "At the junction of the roads from Daulis and Delphi in Phocis." The three-way junction. In Oedipus's mind, the long-suppressed bloody memory surged. A dusty road, a cart, a haughty old man, a whip descending upon him, the sharp crack of a staff. "When did this happen?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Jocasta's answer pierced his heart like a dagger. "Just before you became king of this land." In horror, Oedipus asked for a description of Laius. Jocasta said, "He was tall, his hair beginning to gray and somewhat resembled you." That final sentence struck the last blow to Oedipus's soul. He could be the killer of Laius. Yet in a corner of his mind, the last bastion of reason still flickered with hope. "You said, according to the shepherd, that robbers killed Laius. If he says the same again, it proves I did not, for one man does not equal several. If only one man is involved, there is no need to search further than me." This was the only branch he could grasp. Oedipus immediately ordered that the elderly shepherd, the sole surviving witness of the attack, be brought to the palace. However, fate's third strike was hidden behind the comforting words of the messenger. According to the story the messenger told, Oedipus was not actually the biological son of Polybus. Years ago, a servant from the palace had abandoned a baby on a mountain. At that time, the servant had encountered a shepherd who took the child and personally delivered him to the childless king and queen of Corinth. Because of the swelling in his feet, the child came to be called Oedipus. Oedipus's world collapsed around him. He was a child of fabrication. At that moment, Jocasta understood everything. Her face turned as white as lime. She begged Oedipus to abandon his search. "It would be better if you never knew who you truly are." But Oedipus, relentless in pursuit of the truth, did not listen. Jocasta ran to the palace chamber with one final scream. "Ah, ill-fated one!" And finally, the stage was set for fate's final blow. Laius's former servant, the very one who had left the baby on the mountain, was brought to the palace. Oedipus interrogated him to learn the truth. Trembling with fear, the servant confessed the terrible secret he had hidden for years. The baby had been abandoned on the mountain by Laius's order, taken by the shepherd and brought to Corinth. Thus, the curse of the prophecy was revealed. Everything was laid bare. The riddle had been solved. Oedipus, who had once solved the Sphinx's riddle, now solved the most terrifying riddle of his own life, and the answer was himself. He was the son of Laius and Jocasta, the killer of his father and the husband of his mother. Confronted with this horrifying truth, Oedipus let out one final cry, echoing through the palace walls. "Everything is revealed. O sunlight, may this be the last I see of you. I should not have been born by the one who bore me. I should not have united with the one I united with. I should not have killed the one I killed." With these words, he ran into the darkness of the palace, now a man who had glimpsed the blinding light of truth, yet was about to lose his worldly light. The final cry, echoing across the marble floors of the palace, pierced the hearts of the elders of Thebes waiting outside in the agora. The chorus. That voice was not the voice of a king. It was the scream of a soul crushed between the gears of the god's infernal machine, rising from the deepest point of existence. As Oedipus disappeared into the shadows of the palace, only a frozen silence and the dreadful words suspended in the air remained. No one dared look at another. All eyes were fixed on the massive palace doors, now appearing like tombstones. The man who had twice saved their city, the sharp mind that defeated the Sphinx, the unshakable will that uncovered the plague's secret, was now buried under the wreckage of his own truth. This was the peak of tragic irony, a human believing in the freedom of his own actions, yet a pawn in the hands of dark forces, thinking himself innocent, yet living under the weight of a curse. Inside, in the dim corridors of the palace, time itself seemed shattered. Oedipus's final words were not merely a cry for Queen Jocasta, they were a death sentence. She had understood the truth at the moment the messenger from Corinth confronted the old shepherd. When the shepherd admitted in a trembling voice that he had taken a baby from Laius's palace, Jocasta's world collapsed. In that instant, all the ghosts of the past, the terrible secrets she had buried in the depths of her soul for years, came to life. The ill-fated prophecy that came to Laius, the tiny helpless infant abandoned on the mountain with bound feet, and now, standing before her, the man who was both her husband and her son. With one last plea to Oedipus, "It would be better if you never knew who you truly are," she did not only express hope, she proclaimed her own downfall. When Oedipus, ravenous for the truth, did not listen, nothing more could be said for Jocasta. "Ah, ill-fated one, I can find no other name for you now," she cried, running into the palace, a desperate step toward her own end. As soon as Jocasta rushed madly into the palace, she tore at her hair with both hands and ran to the bedchamber. That chamber had once been her bridal room, the place of her greatest joys as a mother, but now it stood as the silent witness to the monstrous sin she had committed, the incest that defiled the sacred laws. Behind her she slammed the doors shut, drawing the bolts. One last barrier now lay between her and the dreadful truth of the world. Inside, she began to call upon her long-dead first husband, Laius. Her voice was like a lament, recalling the son who had shed his father's blood and begotten cursed children from his own mother's womb. Her eyes fell upon the bed that had held both husband and son, the shameful bed where she had borne children to her own child. Upon it, she wailed, sobbed, and struck herself in grief. That bed was no longer a home of love, but the monument of the god's curse, the ruin of a bloodline, and the most concrete proof of her disgrace. Crushed beneath a weight she could no longer bear, her eyes fell upon the sash hanging from the ceiling beam, a colorful silk girdle that had once encircled her waist as the emblem of her queenship. Now it would be her only means of release. In that moment, she did not hesitate. The divine law that had restored balance by crushing Oedipus, the patricide, the man who had wed his mother, was now at work upon Jocasta too. Fastening the noose, she surrendered her last breath to the world, strangled by her own hand. At that very moment, Oedipus, his mind shattered, raged through the palace like a storm. The blinding light of truth had torn down every wall within him. He ran wildly, crying out for a sword. What would he do with it? Slay himself, or rip open the cursed womb that had given him life? He did not know. He only shouted, asking where his wife, no, not his wife, but the woman who had borne both him and his children, was hiding. In his frenzy, a god, whether Apollo, god of suffering, or another, guided him to her chamber, for no servant dared to reveal the place of that dreadful end. As if driven by an invisible hand, he hurled himself against the double doors. With a terrible cry, he forced them open and rushed inside. There he saw her, hanging in the center of the room, her lifeless body swaying from the rope, the noose still biting at her neck. The wretched man unleashed screams that no human throat should utter, cries more beast than man. Trembling, he lifted her down, her poor body collapsing to the ground. Then began the most dreadful scene of all. Oedipus fell upon the corpse of the woman who was both mother and wife. He wept, he lamented. Then, suddenly resolute, he rose, his eyes fixed upon the golden pins that fastened her robes, glittering in the light. He seized them, tearing them loose with desperate fury. He was no longer merely a victim of fate, but a judge who would pass sentence upon himself. The tragic hero, accepting the guilt imposed upon him by destiny, chose to bear responsibility for all and make the doom his own. He cried out that his eyes would never again behold such horrors, nor sins so foul. In darkness now these eyes shall see nothing. Oh, that they had never seen at all! They shall never again recognize those I once could know. And with that, he drove the golden pins again and again into his own eyes, the very organs that had seen the world but had been blind to truth. It was not suicide, but something deeper, a rejection of the light the gods had granted him, an embrace of chosen darkness. Knowledge had brought illumination, but it was a blinding, searing light. When the veil of truth was lifted, it revealed that the truth itself was but ignorance and deception. Seeing he had been blind, he would now truly see. Blood poured from his ruined eyes, streaming down his face like a black storm of rain. The tragedy was shared by two, husband and wife, mother and son, who had once enjoyed deep happiness, now exchanged for sobs, grief, and death. Oedipus, now a blind man, stumbled through the palace halls, crying out that the doors be opened, that the murderer of his father, the husband of his mother, the monster be shown to all of Thebes. He cursed himself and declared he could no longer remain in that palace or upon that land. He needed someone to lead him, for the agony was unbearable. At last the palace doors were thrown open, revealing to the people of Thebes a spectacle that pierced even the hardest hearts. Oedipus emerged, his face and body drenched in blood, before the very citizens who once hailed him as a hero. No longer did he see the physical world, but only the boundless torment within. "Apollo, my friends, Apollo," he moaned. "It is he who has brought these agonies upon me, yet the hands that blinded me were mine alone, and what was left for me to see in this world anyway?" He could never again look upon the faces of his children, nor of his father and wretched mother in the afterlife. He was the most hated of mortals in the eyes of the gods. Thus, with his new blind and enlightened self, he took his first steps toward the long, dark exile that awaited him. In the hollow sockets of his eyes shone his answer to fate. He had accepted the penalty allotted to him, but he had chosen his own path. In this he made the first act of a free man, no longer reliant on divine gifts, but lifted by resolve and endurance. He gave his own reply to destiny. When the massive gates of the palace opened, the people of Thebes beheld a horror no mortal or god could have imagined. Before them stood not a king, but the living embodiment of mankind's deepest tragedy, his face washed in his own blood, crushed under the weight of his truth. Once the sharp mind that defeated the Sphinx had shone in those eyes. Now he had made them bloody hollows with his own hands. It was no suicide, but a deeper defiance, a refusal of divine light, a choice for his own darkness. Seeing he had been blind, he would now truly see. The people who once knelt before him to be saved from the plague now recoiled from him as from the plague itself. Horrified whispers echoed through the stones of the Agora, while the wise elders who had seen every disaster turned their faces away, unable to endure the sight. Amid this chaos, Creon, now the sole ruler of the city, stepped forward with solemn strides. There was neither triumph nor malice on his face, only the shadow of the heavy responsibility that rested on a statesman's shoulders was visible. He approached Oedipus and addressed the servants. If you have no respect for men, at least show reverence for the fire of Helios, the giver of life, and be ashamed to leave this accursed creature, rejected by neither the earth, nor the sacred rain, nor the daylight, exposed in the public square. Quickly take him to the palace. It is the duty of his family before anyone else to witness and bear the consequences of their kin's calamities." Creon's voice was firm. This was not an act of mercy, but a necessity. The stain corrupting the city, this abomination, had to be kept from sight. It must not draw further curse upon Thebes. When Oedipus was led back through the dark corridors of the palace, neither time nor place held any meaning for him. There was only pain, an endless agony that burned both his soul and body. He murmured Apollo's name, whispering that the god was the source of these unbearable torments. Yet he knew that it was not another's hand that had blinded him, but his own. In this new darkness, the thing that hurt him most was the faces he would never see again. And among those faces, the most innocent, the purest, were his 4 children, born of his own blood and sin, perhaps moved by a fleeting compassion, or perhaps fulfilling a final royal duty. Creon brought Oedipus's small daughters, Antigone and Ismene, before him. When Oedipus heard their timid footsteps and stifled sobs, he turned his bloodied face toward them. "Oh gods, are these the sobbing my beloved daughters?" he wailed. Creon replied, "You are not mistaken. I brought them here because I understood the longing that has burdened your heart for so long." The blind king stretched his trembling, bloody hands into the void. "Where are you, children? Come closer to these brotherly hands," he whispered. Despite their fear, the girls stepped forward toward him. When Oedipus felt their tiny hands in his own, all the tears he had been unable to shed over the years poured out, mingled with blood from his hollow eyes. "See," he said, his voice choked with anguish, "these hands have robbed your father's once shining eyes of light. I could see, yet I was blind, my children. I was unaware of everything. The man you call father was your mother's son." He drew them close, embracing their small bodies. Though he could no longer see them, he wept at the thought of what the world would demand of them. How would they face the people of Thebes, attend gatherings, festivals? Who would dare share the burden of this cursed lineage, this abominable sin, when they reached marriageable age? "No one, my children. You will live and fade alone without heirs," he whispered into their ears. Within this heart-wrenching embrace, the difference between the sisters became clear. Ismene, the younger, clung to her father's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Fear and grief crushed her delicate spirit. Antigone, though tears streamed down her cheeks, stood tall. She grasped her father's bloody hand more tightly, as if to say, "I am here. I will never leave you." In her childlike form, the first sparks of that unyielding will, the pure-hearted hope that would one day defy Creon's laws, glimmered. At that moment, she chose to be a companion not only to her father's physical blindness, but also to his spiritual exile. Yet not all were part of this touching scene. Oedipus's sons, Eteocles and Polynices, though they heard their father's cries and their sisters' sobs, they did not step into the room. For these 2 young men in the spring of their youth, their father's condition was not a tragedy but a source of shame. In the blood on Oedipus's face, they saw the shadow of the cursed legacy looming over their own future and the throne of Thebes. Rather than share in his suffering, they sought a way to escape it, to cleanse themselves of this stain. Their silence was heavier than the harshest insult. As Oedipus clutched his daughters, he felt the absence of his sons, the cold, distant quiet, and he understood that in this new dark world, only the unconditional love of his daughters would sustain him. Days turned into weeks, As Thebes struggled to heal the wounds of the plague, the palace wrestled with the presence of a living ghost. Oedipus, confined to his chambers, faced the ruins of his past alone. He was no longer king, no longer father. He had become a forbidden sin lurking in the heart of the city. Creon, ruling the city, knew this state could not continue. Oedipus had himself decreed exile for the killer of Laius, and now that decree had to be enforced. He awaited a sign from the gods, but the gods remained silent. Finally, after long deliberations with the Council of Elders, Creon made his decision. Oedipus must abide by the law he himself had set and leave the lands of Thebes. This decision echoed differently within the palace walls. Ismene wept in despair. Their sons Eteocles and Polynices received the news almost with relief. Their father's exile meant the path to the throne was now open for them. That poisonous rivalry between them had already begun even before their father left the city. Antigone, however, began preparing the moment the decision was announced. For her, there was nothing to debate. Wherever her father went, she would go. Creon tried to dissuade her from this idea. "You are a princess, Antigone," he said. "Your place is in this palace. Following a blind beggar into the roads does not suit you." But the determination in Antigone's eyes rendered all of Creon's reasoning useless. "I will be his eyes," she replied. "I will be his staff, his companion. My place is by his side." Ismene begged her sister. "Do not go, please," she cried. "Do not leave me alone in this dark palace." Antigone embraced her. "You must stay here, Ismene. You will be our eyes and ears in Thebes. You are strong, but your strength belongs here, within these walls. My path is now outside, on the roads." This farewell sealed the sisters' divergent fates, one to remain within law and order, the other to follow the law of love and conscience on the roads. On the day of exile, Oedipus appeared at the palace gates dressed in simple traveler's garments, holding a staff. The wounds on his face had scabbed, and those empty eye sockets now carried a deeper, more terrifying meaning than mere sight ever could. Just as he was about to leave the city, his sons appeared one last time, but not to bid farewell. They stood brazenly, arguing over who would inherit the throne, who would rule first. One claimed the right of age, the other boasted of cleverness and favor among the people. Their greed, their disrespect, extinguished the last remnant of patience in Oedipus. The king who once saved Thebes had now become a prophet of curses. Turning to his sons, his voice was no longer that of a father, but a whisper from the underworld. "Ah, you scoundrels! Instead of honoring your father's pain, you devour each other over his inheritance. Then hear your fate. This throne will bring you no peace. You will fall upon each other for it, and the blood you spill to claim it will be each other's blood. You will divide this inheritance with the sword, and both of you shall die by each other's hand upon this land." As this terrible curse echoed across the stones of the agora, Eteocles and Polynices froze for a moment, but soon, dismissing their father's words as the ramblings of an old man, they returned to their quarrel. Oedipus turned his back on them for the last time. Nothing remained in Thebes to hold him. Antigone linked arms with her father. Together they left through one of the 7 gates of the city, in a silence so profound that no one dared watch them. When the gates closed behind them, an era for Thebes had ended, and a new tragedy began. Outside stretched the vast, indifferent lands of Boeotia. A blind king and his faithful daughter, once the most powerful ruler and the most delicate princess, were now 2 wandering beggars. The road before them was not merely a path of exile, but also a journey of purification, of wisdom and of rebirth forged in suffering. Oedipus's wounded and swollen foot symbolized the first violence that tore him from the earth. Now those feet were taking the first steps on a long dark road that would reconnect him with the most basic truths of humanity, pain and love. As the 7 gates of Thebes fell silent behind them like a tombstone, father and daughter took their first steps toward the indifferent and seemingly endless void of the world. For Oedipus, the world was no longer formed of colors and shapes, but of sounds, scents and touches, an abyssal ocean of darkness. His eye sockets still throbbed with the fresh wounds he had made with his own hands, yet this physical pain was nothing compared to the indescribable shame and sorrow that burned his soul like embers. He was no longer a king, nor fully human. He had become the embodiment of his own curse, despised by gods and men alike. Antigone, in her small, delicate body, carried the weight of a mountain. She was not only guiding a blind father, she was accompanying a fallen world, a ruined lineage, and the darkest tragedy of humanity. Her presence was the only branch Oedipus could cling to in this bottomless darkness. She was not only his eyes, but also his mind and conscience. She was a hope without self-interest. Their journey was not an escape, but a drifting. They did not know where they were going, they only walked. By day, they moved under the scorching sun of Boeotia, along dusty and rocky paths. By night, they took refuge under an olive tree or on the cold floor of an abandoned shepherd's hut. At first, Oedipus was like a ship caught in a storm, his spirit battered by waves of anger, shame, and despair. He relived the oracle's words, his wife's final cry, and the brazen quarrel of his sons over and over in his mind. He spoke not, only gripping Antigone's hand as though in a vice. Antigone understood his silent storm. She too did not speak. With the rhythm of their steps and the warmth of her hand, she said to him, "I am here." The truth that a human can reach their own humanity only through the presence of another found its most tangible form in their silent journey. As they passed through villages and towns, people fled from them like plague. Those who saw Oedipus's hollow, bloodied eyes screamed in terror. Mothers hid their children under their skirts. Their presence was an insult to orderly and ordinary life. He was a living monument to the gods' wrath, to the cruelest face of fate. Antigone, in order to preserve her father's dignity, held her head high, even when forced to beg. She would stand at a doorway and whisper, "A piece of bread, a sip of water for a blind man and his daughter." Sometimes a merciful hand offered them a dry loaf or a jug of water. Other times, doors slammed shut in their faces. With each rejection, with each insult, Oedipus felt more deeply how the curses he had cast had come alive in flesh and blood. The seasons were the sole witnesses to their endless journey. They burned under the scorching heat of summer, were drenched by the cold rains of autumn, and shivered in the biting winter winds. Oedipus's body slowly adapted to these harsh conditions. No longer a king sleeping on soft palace beds, he was now an exile resting on the hardness of the earth, the chill of stone. His unseen eyes sharpened the other senses. From the direction of the wind, he sensed what was coming. From the smell of the earth, he guessed the presence of a spring. From the distant cry of a bird, he discerned the path ahead. This was the beginning of a primal wisdom forged in suffering. This process was a journey of purification, a rebirth, a kind of therapy. Over the years, Antigone grew, the delicate child becoming a strong young woman. She not only cared for her father, but also learned from him. At night, by the fire, Oedipus would tell her the names of the stars, the stories carried by the wind, the ancient legends of gods and heroes. This was Oedipus reckoning with his own past, with his cursed knowledge. Every story he told reflected his own tragedy. This journey had become a school for them, a sort of rite of passage. Oedipus slowly changed. The storm of anger that raged in his soul subsided, giving way to a deep, melancholic acceptance. He no longer rebelled against the gods, nor tried to bargain with them. He accepted the guilt fate imposed upon him, took responsibility for all he had done, and claimed his destiny as his own. He had become a guilty innocent. This was the first emergence of the free man, described by André Bonnard. Oedipus, far from divine favors, with a greatness born of resolve and mastery over desire, answered his own destiny. Years passed. They lost count of how many springs and winters they had seen. Their feet had traversed countless paths of Greece, their faces burned under countless suns. One day, their weary steps brought them to the borders of Attica, into the shadow of Athens, to the sacred lands known as Colonus. The moment they set foot on this soil, they felt the air shift. This place was unlike any they had ever walked before. The air was softer, more peaceful. The wind carried the fresh scent of wildflowers and wet earth. Oedipus paused. "This is different, Antigone," he whispered. "There is a sanctity here." As they moved further, they found themselves within a dense green grove. This was the very place Sophocles described when speaking of his birthplace. "Stranger, you have come to these lands with your noble steeds, to a place unlike any other in the world, the white-soiled region of Colonus. Here, the nightingale sings with a fire unmatched elsewhere. At the end of green valleys, in the sunlit trees, shielded from storms, in the thick ivy it hides. Under the daily dew from the sky, the beautiful clustered narcissus blooms, along with saffron as golden as sunlight. In the midst of this indescribable tranquility, Oedipus sank onto a rock from exhaustion. At that moment, a voice rose from the depths of the grove. It was a native of Colonus approaching them. "Stop there, strangers," the man called out. "You tread on sacred ground. This is the grove of the Furies, the Erinyes, where ordinary mortals may not enter. Leave immediately." Oedipus understood everything in that instant. Years ago, the oracle at Delphi had whispered not only of his dreadful fate, but also of the place where it would end. In the grove of the Erinyes, he would find peace after his years of exile. He was no longer a fugitive, but a traveler who had reached the final destination of his destiny. "Do not drive me away," he said, his voice tired but resolute. "I have come here to take refuge. Inform your king, Theseus. My coming brings not a curse, but a blessing to these lands, to these." These words only enraged the Colonus native further. He began questioning Oedipus to learn who he was. Soon the elders of Colonus, hearing news from the Agora, surrounded the grove. They too feared that this blind, ragged beggar would desecrate the sacred land. When they learned his name, they were horrified. The patricide, the cursed man who had married his own mother, now stood in their sacred grove. They demanded his immediate expulsion. At that moment, Oedipus revealed the painful wisdom he had accumulated over the years, his tragic defense. He was not a criminal. He was a victim of fate. "My deeds," he said, his voice now that of a king judging himself rather than a beggar, "do not define me as much as my sufferings do. I committed my crimes unknowingly. I killed a father I did not know in a roadside quarrel to defend my honor. I married a woman I did not know was my mother, presented to me as a prize. I am not the agent of my actions, but the one upon whom actions were inflicted. My body has been the stage for the gods' play. Therefore, Do not see me as a stain or a wretch. I have been purified by my unspeakable suffering. I am no longer a curse, I carry a sanctity. Apollo promised me, my tomb shall bring protection and victory to the land in which it rests. These words, his tragic and noble defense, softened the hearts of the elders. They no longer saw Oedipus as a curse, but as a victim who had endured the gods' trials. Just as this sense of humanity and compassion rose, the sound of horses from Thebes was heard. Oedipus's other daughter, Ismene, ran to her father crying and told him of the battle for the throne in Thebes. His sons, Eteocles and Polynices, had turned against each other. And the most shocking news, the Theban seers had declared that the side near Oedipus's grave would prevail in the war. The prophecy left Oedipus horrified. The fate he had spent his life trying to escape now threatened to turn his lifeless body into a prize of war. Soon the first to pursue this prophecy was Creon, the new ruler of Thebes. Creon approached Oedipus with a false show of concern, begging him to return to Thebes, claiming forgiveness. But Oedipus, with his blind eyes, sensed the greedy intent behind Creon's words. "Not me," he said, his voice icy. "It is my dead body you want, Creon." When Creon was rejected, his mask fell, and he attempted to forcibly take Oedipus and seize his daughters. At that moment of tyranny, Theseus, wise king of Athens, arrived with his entourage. Demonstrating that a king's word is a sacred oath, he roared, "No one dares to harm a guest under my protection on Athenian soil." Theseus's soldiers rescued the daughters, and Creon returned to Thebes, humiliated and enraged. Oedipus was protected by the mercy of a just king, his loyalty to Athens cemented. Shortly after Creon's departure, another exile approached the grove. Oedipus's eldest son, Polynices. He too came to beg forgiveness and persuade his father to his side. Yet on Oedipus's face was the accumulated anger of years. "Is it you?" he called out. "Where were you when I was driven from that city in rags? And now, defeated in your own quarrel, you think of me?" Oedipus rose. No longer a helpless blind man, he was now a prophet speaking with the power of the gods. His voice echoed like the roar of a storm. "You will die by each other's hands. This struggle for the throne will send you both into the darkness of Hades. You will divide Thebes by the sword, and your share shall be only blood and death. This is the legacy of your father." This dreadful curse left Polynices in terror. Yielding to the certainty in his father's words, he knowingly walked toward death, to that bloody rendezvous before the walls of Thebes. Oedipus had now settled his final account with the world. He had cursed his sons, bid farewell to his daughters, and offered gratitude to the city that had given him refuge. At that moment, the sky darkened, and a mighty thunder rolled from afar. This was the call of the gods. In a calm voice he summoned Theseus. "The time has come, King," he said. "Follow me. I will show you that sacred place that will protect the future of Athens, my final resting place. No one else shall know this secret." After bidding farewell to his daughters, Oedipus walked alone, accompanied by Theseus, into the depths of the grove. He walked and was never seen again. No grave, no body was found. Oedipus, purified of his sins and sufferings, was accepted into the underworld by the gods. Blessed by his tragedy, he became a mysterious being who brought protection and prosperity to the lands of Colonus. He was no longer guided by Antigone. Despite his blind eyes, Oedipus walked with confident steps as if following an invisible light toward the deepest, most sacred point of the grove. He looked back at his daughters one last time and embraced them. His voice carried neither anger nor grief, only the warmth of boundless love and acceptance. "My children," he said, Amid all these disasters, a single word can make all things forgiven. Love. The love you saw in me was more than you would ever see in anyone else. Then he parted from them, and allowing only Theseus to follow, vanished into the shadows of the grove. Nothing about it was ever known. How it happened, what exactly occurred. When Theseus returned after a while, his face bore the indescribable awe of one who had witnessed a divine mystery. According to what he later recounted, neither lightning nor storm had taken Oedipus. One of the gods of earth or sky had gently called him near, and the earth had opened without pain to embrace him. His body was never found. He was no longer mortal nor immortal. He had become the guardian spirit of that land, a daimon. Thus the prophecy completed its final and most unexpected circle. Oedipus's death was not a punishment, but a blessing. The man who had been cursed throughout his life was transformed into a gift through his death. His fate demonstrated, in the harshest way, that humans cannot escape destiny, while also proving that even the most unbearable suffering can become purification, wisdom, and even sanctity. He was the innocent guilty, accepting the crime destiny forced upon him, taking responsibility for all he had done, and making his fate his own. That same man, who had brought plague upon Thebes, now promised eternal prosperity and protection to the lands of Athens. And in the silent grove of Colonus, whenever the wind blew and the nightingales sang, it was as if his tragic yet triumphant spirit whispered, "A human may be defeated by fate, but even in that defeat, one can create freedom and greatness." When Oedipus's body vanished from the earth, a divine silence fell over the sacred grove of Colonus. King Theseus of Athens, the only mortal to witness this mysterious and awe-inspiring moment, returned from the grove with the weight of sorrow and great secret upon his face. Where Oedipus took his final breath, into which soil his body merged, these became Athens' most protected secret. Antigone and Ismene understood that their father was no longer a suffering exile or a cursed shadow, but the guardian spirit, a daemon of that land. Their tears were no longer of grief, but of acceptance intertwined with pain and respect for their father's tragic greatness. Their duty was complete. They had become his eyes, his staff, and his companion. Now, as silent guardians of his sacred legacy, they had to return to Thebes' bloody future. Yet the sacred peace in Colonus was only a deceptive calm before the storm breaking behind Thebes' seven-gated walls. Oedipus's body may have merged with the earth, but his curse, the terrible prophecy he left to his ungrateful sons, had begun to sprout like a poisonous seed in the air of Thebes. Eteocles and Polynices saw their father's exile not as the end of a shame, but as the beginning of a power vacuum. Their fragile agreement to alternate the throne year by year was shattered from the very first day under the shadow of Eteocles' ambition. At the end of the first year, Eteocles refused to surrender the crown to his brother, declaring Polynices a traitor and driving him from Thebes. Polynices, enraged by this injustice and betrayal, fled to Argos, where, with King Adrastus' support, he raised a large army under the leadership of 7 commanders. Thus, Oedipus's curse turned into a bloody war of brother against brother, the fateful 7 against Thebes siege that would stain the city's walls with blood. The city was besieged, the streets echoed with cries and clashing shields. After days of fierce battles, both sides were exhausted, and it became clear that victory would favor no one. As a last resort, it was decided that the fate of the war would be determined by a duel between the 2 brothers. Before the gates of Thebes, once cradled in the same cradle and nourished by the same mother, now stood two bloodthirsty enemies. Oedipus's curse gleamed at the tips of their swords. "With your blades, divide this inheritance, and by each other's hand you shall die upon this land." And the prophecy unfolded in its cruelest form. In a fierce struggle, the two brothers mortally wounded each other, dying simultaneously. With their deaths, the male line of Oedipus's family was extinguished, leaving Thebes' throne empty once more. This power vacuum was filled by Creon, who upheld order and law above all else. Creon's first act was not to heal Thebes' wounds, but to cement his own authority. While honoring Eteocles with a grand funeral as a hero, he branded Polynices a traitor who had waged war against his homeland, forbidding even a handful of soil to be placed upon his corpse. The body was left in the battlefield to be devoured by wolves and birds. Anyone who disobeyed this decree faced death. Thus, as one tragedy ended, another, perhaps even purer and more unyielding, was beginning. The tragedy of Antigone. For Antigone, Creon's law was nothing against the unwritten, eternal laws of the gods. A sibling's duty to their dead was holier than any king's command. She had inherited from her father not only companionship in blindness, but the will to stand alone against destiny. And alone, defying Creon's cruel decree, she would pay with her life for the curse upon Oedipus's lineage. Oedipus's mortal body had vanished on the sacred grounds of Colonus, yet his story, his profound mythos, was at that very moment taking its first step toward immortality. Though his name had long existed as a whisper in Homer's verses, it was with the pen of Sophocles that it was etched indelibly into humanity's collective memory. Across the centuries, his tragedy became not merely a stage play, but one of the deepest analyses of the human condition. Philosophers saw in his relentless pursuit of truth a symbol of the spirit of enlightenment. Aristotle, in his Poetics, used Oedipus's story as an example of how a tragedy could achieve perfection. The reversal of his fate, peripeteia, the moment of recognition when he understood the truth, anagnorisis, and the catharsis experienced by the audience became foundational pillars of tragic art. Yet the journey of Oedipus's story did not end within the bounds of the ancient world. 25 centuries later, a Viennese physician, Sigmund Freud, encountered the ghost of this ancient king of Thebes while attempting to illuminate the darkest and most hidden recesses of the human mind. In his patient's dreams, slips of the tongue, and deepest desires, Freud perceived an echo of Oedipus's fate. In this tragedy, he saw not just the story of a man, but a universal human condition. The unconscious conflict experienced in the soul of every boy, the primal desire for the mother and the rivalrous jealousy toward the father. Thus, the cursed king of Thebes lent his name to one of the most fundamental concepts of modern psychology, the Oedipus complex. His personal tragedy became the shared inheritance of humanity, an inevitable waypoint in our psychological development. Thinkers like Erich Fromm interpreted the myth not simply as a tale of incest taboo, but as a symbol of rebellion against patriarchal authority. Ultimately, Oedipus's story remained not an answer, but an endless question. He stands as the immortal symbol of humanity's unceasing struggle, agon, between fate and free will, knowledge and blindness, guilt and innocence. Oedipus was blind to truth with his own eyes. When he gouged them out with his own hands, he lost the light of the external world, but attained a spiritual illumination, the wisdom of his own tragedy. His story reminds us that knowledge can sometimes be the heaviest burden, and truth the most blinding light. The king of Thebes disappeared while seeking the truth like a detective in pursuit of his own crime. Yet his immortal mythos continues for thousands of years to shed light on humanity's enduring effort to solve the dark puzzle within itself. I hope this has been a beautiful story to end your day. I look forward to your comments and requests. Don't forget to follow my channel. Love.